yes, today we're looking at the artist Idealism, and with over 2 million monthly listeners, if you've even dabbled in the Lo-Fi playlists, there's a very slim chance that you haven't come across him. What's up, gang, and welcome back to another video. In this series, we look at the musical trends, past and present, to understand the techniques used so that you guys can make better music. My name's Will, and I make a plethora of music under the moniker Hushchild. You might recognize some of his cover art from your YouTube recommended page, or you've heard his music in one of these featured playlists. And the reason we're looking at Idealism today is because it kind of breaks the rules of what a lot of us would consider lo-fi. The chords and melodic elements aren't heavily sidechained, and the mix quality is quite bright. There's quite a lot of treble within the overall mix. And I thought that this would be some really interesting research to base for today's episode. Now, today's sponsor is DistroKid, and they're doing wonderful things for me and for the community, so we'll have a few more words on them later on in the video. But for now, let's jump into it. Okay, so this is what my finished project looks like. There's a fair bit going on, but it's really not the busiest thing we've ever looked at on Inspired by History. I've kept it to pretty much these groups. I count these bottom two groups as kind of atmospheric groups. We've got the bass, the drums, and the piano. Let's jump into the piano because you've heard a preview of this beat. If you want to hear the finished beat, feel free to use the timestamps below. And if you want to download the stems to this project, you can grab that from my Patreon, as well as other goodies such as the Lo-Fi, effects rack, and other racks that we've made in previous videos. And of course, you can book one-to-one tuition with me, as well as production collaborations as well. So for the keys, again, I was using my new favorite. I was using the claustrophobic piano, free VST from the piano book. I just started off with these chords. And of course, I could spend a lot of time grabbing each of these notes, extending them out and making them random or more humanistic. But as you guys know, I'm all about speeding up our workflow. So on this particular track, I added my Strum Rack. I've made a video on the Strum Rack before, and it's linked in the description. You can download it for free. It does link to my Patreon, but it's a free download. And what I did with the Strum Rack is just automate it so that the speed that it strums those chords or rolls those chords changes, and the sustain length changes as well. And I vary these chords as well. As you can see, I've got these different colored regions. So as I started to arrange this track, I'm thinking, how can I give some variety to this so we can make some larger chords? When we get to this section here, because of what I've played on this top piano line, which we will get to, I wanted to change the chords slightly. So I just got rid of the top note that we normally see here and played them at a quieter velocity so the chords sound a little bit more dull in comparison to the previous. I just tried to make sure that within this 16-bar phrase, it didn't sound like a cut copy loop, but there is of course some kind of theme or motif. So with the top line piano, if you look at this and you kind of play spot the difference with the different parts, you can actually see that with this first one, I'm mimicking a similar pattern with the octave above and below. When we get to this one here, I'm just muting that octave above. And the same goes for this part here. You can see that I play the same two notes here, and then I go higher to the A and the C sharp. Or when we go down to this, I play it slightly different. We've got the same two notes here, but instead I'm playing the C sharp below and the A below, and then the E and the G sharp there. Just kind of inverting some of the performance techniques here. When we put all of the piano elements together, this is what we have. And this was kind of difficult because I was always going back to our original reference material, which was Idealism, and specifically Idealism's latest album that came out earlier this week is often quite bright. It's not rolled off by the EQ, it's not muffled. So I realized the piano, when I recorded it in, was sounding quite dark. So of course we added Strum and we're using the decent sampler. But when we go to my piano group, I'm just making sure I make the piano quite a bit brighter in the high mids than it was originally. You can see that I'm boosting that by almost 7 dBs, which I don't normally do, and just bringing down by 4 dB in the 300 Hertz region. In this group, I'm also using the glue compressor. I'm not pushing it too hard. I'm just making sure everything sits together nicely. But I am driving the fresh air plugin quite hard to again make sure that I bring out all of that brightness. Okay, so let's jump into the drums. So I'm using our old faithful Esther kick. And you've seen this technique time and time again in my videos, but it's really going to be a key part of the Idealism sound. I've made sure to warp my samples. I've set it to beat. And then I've used the forward option on transients and brought that down from 100 with the kick drum sitting at around 50. And that just makes sure that there's no large overtones. It's quite short, the kick drum. And I've made sure that I've EQ'd all of the sub off. We're sitting it at actually around 100 Hertz. It's sitting at 97.9 here. Again, taking out some of those muddy low mids there. I was noticing with the reference material tracks that we were listening to, the kick really wasn't a staple heavy part. And you've seen me use this before, transient master by Native Instruments, and I'm just using that very subtly again to kind of pick out that first transient and just make sure that again it does just cut through the mix. To get my snare, I resampled 2 rim shot sounds, or a rim shot and a clap, and I used again that same method that we looked at. I was setting my sample to warp, I was choosing beats, transients, the forward transient, and then bringing this down. And then I chose a new audio track, as again you've seen me do before in previous videos, external into resampling, and then just recorded one of those one shots and then just placed it in the track. This is really the most quantized piece of percussion here. It's sitting like 8 ticks ahead of the beat marker there, but after that point I pretty much copy and pasted it, and you can see that in the occasional space I've just taken out the snare to give the track some breathing room. With the kick and snare, it sounds like this. So you can tell that that snare sample there, there's really not much body to it at all. It's all in the higher register because again, I was looking at Idealism, trying to replicate that short snare sound. And you're going to see later on that I pair that snare with some kind of ASMR ear candy as well. With the snare, again, I'm using the transient master, a little bit heavier this time, and EQing the snare to, again, those higher regions as I previously mentioned. Then I've got this kind of side stick sound that goes throughout the track. I heard this in Idealisms. I thought it was a great way to just signify some kind of pulse, some kind of quantization. So you can see that this is actually sitting on the grid all the way through, with a little bit of Valhalla reverb there, almost sweeping off pretty much all of the frequencies, panning it a little bit away from where the kick and snare are sitting. With the hi-hat, a live hi-hat sound, same as our reference material, but just choosing like 4 different samples. I actually use this same method in my tracks as well. Notice how warp is on, beats is on, transient forward markers, but it's starred here as is transpose and as is gain. The reason for that is these are all separate from one another. So this first sample that we've used there, I've brought it down to 71, minus 24 cents, minus 19 on the gain there. This next one, slightly louder, minus 14 cents, and then 17. So it's shorter, but it's higher in the mix. So we go to our next one, sense a trend there. I'm making sure that these are all quite human. Not any one sound is going to be the same. Now, speaking of techniques that I use in my own tracks, I'm often releasing my own music, so I think it's a good point of the video to have a few words from our sponsor. Yes, I've been releasing music under the moniker Hushchild for quite some time now, and with the help of our sponsor DistroKid, they make uploading your music to all of the streaming platforms so easy, and they've also brought my music to a much wider audience. You may have seen these before. This is Spotify Canvas, and with DistroKid, you're automatically granted access to use Canvas. And with the Visi tool that they've just launched on their site, it makes creating a Spotify Canvas even easier. If you're interested in releasing your music with DistroKid, make sure that you use the link in the description below because you'll get a 7% discount. Now, without any more interruptions, let's crack on with the video. Just EQ'd, nothing else on the hat group there. Then I've got a couple of ride samples. When again, I'm really not doing too much to these. Off center, panned right, and then much harder right, normally at the start of the bar. Making sure that I use as many live sounds rather than electronically produced drum sounds as possible. I've got some chime samples here just to signify a little bit of a change. So all of this together makes up kind of the first section that I had. There's nothing on my drum group overall. I just left it completely blank. You don't have to treat everything. If I've treated my individual sounds, it all sits together. I've just thrown it into a group for ease so it looks a little bit nicer. The bass is super simple. EQ 8, making sure I round off any of the muddy regions. I've got a slower attack, and that is essentially just playing these notes time and time again, but that's it. It's just playing legato notes, the root notes of the chords. Then we get to my ear candy stuff, and this sits with my drums quite nicely. So what is this? I've taken some samples from Splice. I made sure that they were all from the same pack, this ESM pack, but they're all unique samples. And that just helps everything be in keeping. They're all recorded with the same mic in the same room. I don't have to work as hard to EQ them, compress them, all that kind of thing to keep them in keeping with one another. Now I kept these super bright. I added the glue compressor, which kind of squashes all of these guys, keeps them sitting together quite nicely. And then I'm just using the utility plugin here just because I wanted to bring up the gain a little bit more than I had it. So that all adds to just kind of interest for the listener, things that the listener can kind of pick out and hear, and makes the track a little bit unique. If I didn't have that alongside the snare, it's okay, but it's all quite samey. With the group, again, I EQ'd it. I added the Haas effect. That just makes it a little bit wider. I've used the Ozone Imager, again, to just sit it at the sideband of the track. I didn't want it completely central. But I've used sidechain compression to sit these elements very subtly away from the kick and the snare. Like I said, they're not being driven super hard, but they're just being ducked in their volume a tiny bit. So again, we're not adding to the brightness of the kick and the snare. I don't want to really cut them through the track. I just want them to be little twinkles at the sideband of our track. Let's listen to everything I've got here before we look at the atmosphere stuff. Oh, I forgot to mention, so there's some breaks in the track. Take out the hi-hats there. Then it's all pretty samey. When we get to this part of the track, I mentioned that we take away some of the drums to give it some lift. A nice little break there. We create some change with the chords that change color here, but mention that I had just a different chord at the end. I just wanted to have that rule-breaking chord again, that jazzy chord that allows us to go back into the loop. So listen to this. So we've got this nice little lift note here, which is really lovely. It's the only chord that kind of breaks the rules of the track. Everything is pretty much back and forth. We play the same two chords, but we have this little change here. This part of the tutorial comes with kind of a pinch of salt because you could just use one atmospheric sound. For this tutorial with one sample of noise, I was like, oh, okay, we still don't have that kind of static rumble. So I added another noise. You could do this with just one. So what have I got here? So I've got this French presynced here and just some kind of general noise. I've EQ'd this super high and put it into mono. And on my atmospheric group, again, I've EQ'd this, there's no low rumbles, and it's just sidechained to my kick, and that's it. I wanted like a lower texture underneath that, and I wanted to emulate that tape hiss sound. And a great way to do that quickly was just to take some running water. And this is another field recording from the River Thames. And finally, the main part that our ears are going to tune into is this section. You can see on the right here that I've automated this as well. So I've got this crowd noise. And I wanted to make sure, like Idealism, there were these certain words or laughs or humanistic elements that we can listen out for, and that gives that really nostalgic feeling. So how did I automate this? I just made sure that I automated it first in volume, so the bits that I wanted to be heard, like this guy saying whatever, that was louder. And then I secondly automated just the pan of this. So anytime that there's kind of a spoken word element, it normally crosses from the right ear to the left ear or vice versa. Now, I hadn't used this next technique in this specific track, but I think it's important to mention if you're trying to replicate some of the techniques of Idealism, there are certain breaks in the song, like this section here, where Idealism might bring up the volume of the crowd noise, we'll call it, or the atmospheric noise. And he does start to increase the reverb that's on the track. I don't have any reverb on my atmospheric elements. And that adds a ghostly element to all the talking that you can hear. And I believe he starts to bring in some of the low end on the EQ as well. And then once that piano comes back, he zips everything back to its original sound that we've replicated in this track. So again, if you wanted to replicate Idealism element for element, that's a good way to go about it. So there we have it, guys. Here's how I created a lo-fi track inspired by the sounds of Idealism. Have you listened to his new album, Sit in Silence, yet? If you have, what did you think? Do you think it breaks the rules of lo-fi? Or do you think it's just another lo-fi piece of work to sit and study to? What would you guys like to see in future episodes? Please do let me know. And if you've enjoyed this video, it was helpful, entertaining, do give it a like and subscribe if you haven't already, because it greatly helps out the channel. Only 20% of you that regularly watch my videos are currently subscribed. So if a few of you subscribe, it would hugely help me out. As always, you can find anything that I mentioned in the video or previous in the description below. That includes my Patreon, where you can book one-to-one sessions with me, download all the stems from our previous videos, and download the racks that I've also featured there as well. And make sure you join our lovely community on the Discord. We're bringing the beat battle back regularly, and I'd love for you to be a part of that. For now, guys, I thank you so much, and I'll see you next time.
Thank you.